really the only important thing is it respecting the needs of the bread? In other words, if you're shaping really fast but you're ripping the bread, would you consider that a valid method? No, because you don't want to punish the bread. So if you're shaping fast and clean, that's what we want. So now we're going to make a round loaf. I'll take this dough, which is now nicely relaxed. The seams are presently down. So we'll turn it up so the seams are up. Once again, I get the majority of the gas out. And then initially it looks just like the pre-shaping. But here is where you really make certain that you're getting it as tight as you can, so it's got as much structure as possible. So when you're done, it should be this round, tight, symmetrical ball of dough. And your hands will be able to feel the inside of it. You don't want to feel any big pockets that might indicate poor shaping. You want it to have this nice, even density when it's done. So I'll do that again. Even if you're only having 2 or 3 more strokes to go, if you feel your hands getting tacky at all, that's all you have to do. You want to remember that tacky hands lead to a ripped surface, and above all, we want to avoid that ripped surface. That'll always be considered a defect. This is kind of speed for cameras, not for production. What I just did was probably slow down about 50%. So if you're in production, you'll try to get the same results, again, without having any harmful effects on the dough, but in a much quicker manner than that. This dough is fairly relaxed, and it should be relaxed enough for me to turn it into a baguette. This is, of course, the one that started as a cylinder. The seams are presently down. Once again, I'll put the seams up, pat out the gas. And if you're starting from a blunt, your shaping is probably going to be a little bit different. Not necessarily faster or cleaner, but it'll be a little different because you're already starting with this elongated shape. So I'm just simply going to walk this down layer after layer until I get all the way down to the bottom, and I've made a pretty taut seam down there. And now I'll put one hand in the center of the loaf, and it's important to keep your fingertips and the heel of your hand on the workbench. So it's a very, very soft hand. It's hard to quantify exactly how soft your hand is. The way I describe it when I teach is, think of the person you love the most, and you just went over and you put your hand on their forearm. How are you going to have that hand on their forearm? It's going to be gentle, but at the same time there's going to be an affirmation in it. And that's how we want to touch this dough. I've made this little divot here, and then you can hear my hands making noise on the bench because they've remained on the bench the whole time. And I've rolled this out, and when it's proper length, which this looks pretty good, and it's a proper cylindrical shape, I'll call it done. There's my seam. You've got 2 options. You can put your seams down, or many people put their seams up, which is how we do it at the King Arthur Bakery. This is usually the way I teach people to do it, because particularly when you're starting out, it's a good way to get a well-made baguette that has good structure to it and should have pretty good results coming out of the oven. These are now ones that we pre-shaped round instead of cylindrical, and we'll just start by pulling on them so they almost look like the cylindrical ones did. Okay? First we just give a gentle patting, and then we fold about 1/3 of it towards us. Turn it around, repeat. After that second turning, it's kind of like a business letter. This should be about 3 to 4 inches wide at this point. And now I'm going to start this process of folding the dough and pressing, folding and pressing. I'm going to walk my hands all the way down the length of the loaf. I'm doing it the way a lefty does. So if you're a righty, you'll start with your left hand on the right side of the loaf. But I'm a lefty, so I'm going to start with my right hand on the left side of the loaf. My fingers are buried behind the loaf and my thumb is on the top surface. And I'm simply going to bury my thumb by flipping my fingers over. Now I can't see my thumb, but I can see my fingers. And then my left hand comes along and just pats that little part. Walk down the loaf and fold and press, fold and press, fold and press all the way down. So I've just essentially worked up this portion of the loaf, and I've left a pretty visible lip here of about 1 inch. That's important. Now I'll turn it around, and I'll do the same exact thing, but this time instead of having a lip, I'm going to take the seam right to the bench. So again, I start in the same manner. 1, 2, 3, 4, and walk your hands all the way down. Okay, and now I've got my basic shape, and I finish it the same way I did with the blunt one. Okay, so that should give you a nice, well-proportioned baguette with good structure to it.
If you can learn 3 shapes, you'll be able to shape just about everything, I think. So it's batard, baguette, and boule, the round loaf that we shape. So the basic form for me for a batard, it sort of starts off the same. Seam side is up. Seam side is always up. Seam side is always the interior of the loaf. So I degas it a little bit, and then I start with a shape that is more sort of north-south than east-west. The baguette was going to go this way. The batard will go out also, but the batard ends up with a nice belly. So I start with a sort of nice north-south shape, about 2/3 of the way down, and seal. Then I bring the shoulders. I always call them the shoulders. Then you bring what I call the head down and seal. So as I'm rolling this loaf, I'm grabbing very small amounts of dough with my thumbs, and I'm rolling against the bench to really try and create some surface tension on the exterior of the loaf. It's really going to make a big difference in the shaping, and it's really going to translate through to the bake in terms of giving this loaf the strength that it needs to really gain volume when it hits the deck of the oven. You can see that the seam is here, straight line. So at this point, I'm just going to take it down just a tiny bit, and then my hands moving sort of up and down and side to side or east-west just a little bit. And we do these seam up, same thing as a baguette. Okay, so one more of these. So I start with a little bit of a narrow shape. I come 2/3 of the way down, I seal, shoulders, what I call the head down. You can add one more step here. If it feels like this one is just a little bit ragged on the edges, it's not quite as symmetrical as I want at this point, so I'm going to bring these in. And now if I start, and I'll stop again, I've got a pretty square shape, squarish. I need a little bit of flour. So I turn it over.